right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. So, like I said, this is Transformational Leadership with Dorothy Cheney. We're so excited to bring you this next webinar in our Webinar Wednesday series, and we're so glad that you're all here, spending your Wednesday early afternoon, maybe late morning, depending on what part of the United States or what part of the country you're coming in from. So we're very excited to have everyone here. I'm seeing some coalitions and some names in the chat box that I recognize, so it's great to see you all. If you don't know me, I'm Brittany Huffman. I'm the training manager with CADCA, and so I work to bring these webinars and these different trainings to you, our coalition members, and we're so excited to be providing you with these different learning opportunities now in a virtual setting, which is very exciting and kind of it was a new space for us in March, and so we're glad to be able to keep going this on. So something new that we are starting with this particular Webinar Wednesday. So Dorothy, if you can go to the next slide quickly. Following this webinar, we will be having a Q&A session in our CADCA community for those who are current CADCA members. So just very quickly, if you are not currently a CADCA member, this is a list of some of the benefits that you receive as a CADCA member. So you'll get legislative alerts and updates regarding the public policy efforts that we're doing. There's discounted registration rates for a National Leadership Forum and Mid-Year Training Institute, as well as electronic newsletters. You can do postings to our job board, and additionally the CADCA community. So if you've never been on our CADCA community before, it is a wealth of knowledge from your peers across the world, across the country. Just really an opportunity to discuss with other coalition leaders about situations, issues, resources that are available to all coalition leaders across the country. Next slide really quickly. And so then following this one, there will be a members only 1 hour Q&A with Dorothy. So you can get into the community. There will be a discussion board already started there by our director of membership, Amy Pica. And so you can go in, you can start posting, having further discussions with other CADCA members about what you're seeing in today's webinar. So if you have any questions or you're interested in becoming a CADCA member and you're not already, you can contact Lauren Blackwell, and her email address is right there at the bottom of the screen, lblackwell@cadca.org. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Dorothy, and she's going to take us through transformational leadership. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Brittany. And welcome everyone. Brittany, I just saw in the Q&A that there is a question about CADCA membership, so I'll let you answer that. Welcome everyone, and I'm really excited as we were seeing the welcomes. So we've got folks from far and wide. I saw folks from Uganda. Welcome. I don't know what time it is in Uganda, but it's probably really late or really early, so welcome. And I see folks from Connecticut, from Wisconsin, Barbara from Islip, New York. So I see lots of Kathy, Marseille. I got lots of friends on here. It makes me really excited to see old friends and new as we are doing our webinars. So I always say, as we do these webinars, now that we're in our virtual classrooms, that this is not a webinar, this is a virtual classroom. And these learning events are only as good as the discussions that we have. So as we dive into today's topic, which I'm actually really excited to talk about, my goal is to keep everyone engaged. So Brittany is masterful at monitoring the chat box and the Q&A. So I've asked her to stop me if there's something that someone wants to either ask a question about or make a point. Use the chat box or the Q&A. I will also do my best to keep monitoring, but we really encourage you to participate. Oh, Margaret, great to see you. I wish I could see you. So welcome to all of my new friends and my old friends. I'm really excited to talk about this particular topic today. So today's topic is really about talking about the principles of transformative leadership. And we don't have a lot of time together. And in fact, as I was doing this this training and I was preparing the slides, I was thinking, I was envisioning how this would look as a 1 or a 2 day training. This is a really big topic. And it's also a lifelong learning kind of topic, is how we become the best type of transformative leaders that we can so that we get outcomes in our community. But also, how do we transform our communities and our coalitions so that we infuse transformative leadership practices into the strategic prevention framework? We're also going to have a couple of opportunities just to take a minute to assess our own leadership strengths. And I'll give you some ideas on how we can improve the work that we do to inform all of our SPIF processes and practices with transformative leadership principles. Again, so there's a lot of research that's done on leadership, and there's a lot of research that's done on leadership in the for-profit sector. And I know that many of you have come from the for-profit sector, but there's also a lot of research on transformational leadership as a strategy to engage communities in problem solving. And so there's a lot of research both across public health or community health, as well as the for-profit community. So I invite you, as we go through the topic today, that this is really just an invitation for you to continue your research into the different types of leadership and how we can apply some of those leadership strategies so that we can advance our work. So why I want to do this session, and whenever I do webinars or trainings, I always start with, why would I want to do that? And so some coalitions really do struggle with cultivating leadership. And I've seen on more than one occasion, we've got a really strong leader, and that leader may be a volunteer or it may be a staff person, but that leader goes away and the coalition is kind of lost. It's flailing. So, it's really important that we have strategies to cultivate leadership. When it comes to sustainability, and especially as we start to go into what is transformational leadership, you'll see that transformational leadership is a critically important piece of sustainability. And many of you already use transformative or transformational leadership practices. So we want to hear from you. And knowing some of the folks that said hello in the chat, some of you are really good transformational leaders. So I want to hear, as we go through this topic, things that you're doing in your own coalition. I've said it once and I'll say it again. Most of what I've learned has been from working in or with coalitions. And so these webinars become more rich and full and productive when we hear from each other, not just hearing from me. And lastly, the reason that I wanted to do this is developing leadership, which also equates to ownership. It takes strategy and intention. So as we go through this webinar today, I want to talk about the principles of transformational leadership, but also give you an opportunity to think about, how can I apply some of this right now in the work that I'm doing in coalitions? So we have to start any session on transformational leadership by looking at the broader question, what is leadership? So using the chat box, anybody, what is leadership? Empowering others, serving, allowing others to lead, guiding, taking control, guiding a group to a common goal. I love it already. Accountability has a direction and a vision. Empowerment, service, visionary, transparency. I love that. Influence, motivation, all of that is leadership. And just looking at the comments that you guys are putting in the chat box, you know what transformational leadership is. So this is going to be a good conversation. Coaching and counseling, having goals. Leadership is a lifestyle where it is visible in every area of our lives beyond the 9 to 5. That is beautiful. I love that. Clearly championing a cause and making it possible for others to join in that effort. Jane, I love that. So, true or false? Leadership is the same as authority. I'm just enjoying this. Everyone, false, 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 false. Either everybody's right or everyone's wrong. False. Of course it's false. Leadership is not the same as authority. It's not power, it's not authority. And this is a cornerstone of our work. Authority just depends on established power. But leadership is an activity, I love that extends beyond the 9 to 5. Leadership is an activity that may or may not have authority. Paul, you said they're almost opposite. They are almost opposite. But this is a really important concept because look at Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King was one of the greatest leaders in American history. Now, he was an ordained minister, so he had some authority over his congregation, but he was not an elected official, but yet he was the number one leader of the civil rights movement from 1955 until his death in 1968. When I think about leadership, I think about being able to mobilize people around a common vision. And who did it better than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? I have a dream. We all know his leadership. We all shared his vision. And to this day, even though he died in 1968, we all still share his vision for a dream of a civil society with equality and opportunity for all. That's a leader. That's a leader. And so why is leadership versus authority an important distinction when we're talking about our own work in coalitions? Paul says, Peter Drucker, I love Peter Drucker, that's on the for-profit side of things, taught us all decision-making happens from entry to hierarchy. Responsibility is at the top. I love it. We want members to own. Hi, Chris. You need buy-in from people. Leadership encourages a guide and guides. Yes, it's harder to share authority. That's a good point too. Working with volunteers. Love it, Alice. We have no authority. That's just it, right? We don't have any authority. We may have authority over our staff of 2, right? But we don't have authority. But at the community level, for us to be successful in our work, we have to engage systems and organizations over which we have no authority. I don't control the city council. I don't control the school district. I don't control the large healthcare organization. I don't control public health. But I need to engage all of them. And they are looking to us as leaders in this work. So it's really important for us to understand that we have no authority, but yet we are expected to be leaders. And Marie says authority is overrated. Look, let me tell you, I love that. That's true. It is. But leadership is not. Leadership is a way of building. And let's see, Ronald says leadership is building and developing the participation and resources of the group through helping to point the way. Authority is forcing people to do things. I love that. And leadership is working in partnership with others. Love it. Coalitions are volunteers. We need to work with them. We need to lead and we need to guide. And so, one of the things that I hear all the time is it's really hard to get my coalition members to do anything. They come to the meetings, they want to, hear about what's been happening, but it's really hard to engage them. So if that's one of the situations in your coalition is how do we use some transformational leadership practices, knowing that we don't have any authority over those coalition volunteers, but how do we engage them? How do we engage those organizations and systems so that we can get outcomes in our community, but knowing that we don't have any authority over their actions? And so as we think about leadership, there's really a continuum. And let me just say, there's a place for each one of these types of leadership in various sectors of our society and our communities. So first of all, there's autocratic, totally in control, making all decisions oneself. And then there's managerial, where folks are concerned, leaders are concerned with the smooth operation rather than the goals and effectiveness of the organization. I'm sure we can all think of examples of both autocratic and managerial leadership styles. Then there's also the democratic leadership style, which is consulting with others and encouraging equality within the organization, but making final decisions oneself. And then there is collaborative leadership, also known as transformational leadership, network leadership, which is sharing leadership and involving others in all the major decisions, spreading ownership of the organization. And for us to be successful at the community level in our work, we really need to understand and embrace and practice collaborative leadership. But sometimes it's easier said than done. And what does that mean? So we're going to spend some time thinking about and looking at what are some of the principles of collaborative leadership. Now, I also want to tell you, one of the pitfalls, and it's one that I see, is the all about me style of leadership. And I see that not uncommonly in coalition work. And it's interesting. I often am, called by coalitions to help problem solve things like engaging members, for example. And it doesn't take me long, 5 minutes, and I can talk to the coalition coordinator or whoever the coalition leader is that I'm talking to. And I'll say, tell me about what your coalition does. And I can hear things like, well, I distributed 500 brochures and I did a town hall meeting and I was really instrumental. I engaged youth and I met with the superintendent and I redid the bylaws. And I'm sitting there and the wheels in my head as I'm listening to this person who's a coalition leader telling me, I think, where's the room for the coalition to own the work? Right? Like, if we're using I language, no wonder we're having a problem engaging the coalition, because there's no room for anyone else but you, right? Slides are going to be available, yes. And I see it all the time. I informally have called it the all about me style of leadership. But in the research, there actually is, there is a name for it. And it's called the heroic leadership trap. I'm going to just mute for 1 minute. I've got a dog who's trying to get into my den. 1 second, I'm so sorry. I apologize. One of the downsides of working from home. So Amy says, I just had that conversation last night at our coalition. Madeline says, my dogs don't like being locked out of the, I know, I'm sorry. My dog just needed to be in. She really wants to learn about transformative leadership. Margaret says there is no I in team. No, but you know what? So here's the thing. I see this not just with coalition coordinators sometimes, but sometimes I see somebody who's a coalition member who really likes the I language. And it can be a little bit off-putting if somebody wants to, take credit for all the work. We want to build people up, but we also want to make sure that we understand and we have a culture in our coalition that we're aware of the heroic leadership trap. And that we understand, exactly like Margaret said, there is no I in team, right? Christina says, I get it. And I fall into this mostly because I have a lack of participation from coalition members. And even when I throw things out to the space, they just sit there. Yep. That you are special, but you're not unique. That happens. That really happens. So as we go through this, if you've got one of those coalitions that just sits there and doesn't volunteer or doesn't get involved, so think about this session and take some notes or jot down some ideas of how you can, with strategy and intention, slowly change some of the practices within the coalition so that people start to build ownership. Now, remember, this is a marathon, not a race, not a sprint. And you may very well have inherited a coalition where everyone's used to the coalition director doing all the work and taking all the credit. That's okay. This is a marathon, not a sprint, right? But how do we get away from the heroic leadership trap? And how do we infuse and understand transformational leadership so that we distribute the ownership of the work? Now, remember, distributing ownership of the work is what's going to lead to sustainability long term. I'm going to read some of the comments because there's so many good things. Paul says a true leader creates an environment for the team to reach the goal because they each choose to. That's it. And that's where we're going to talk about how do we get there. I love it. And without the coalition, then the leadership is effort. Yep. Training. So I inherited a coalition where everyone was used to the coordinator doing all the work. It's taken me years to redirect and focus the work of the coalition and not the work of the coordinator. Candace, you need to do a session at Forum or Mid-Year on that, how you successfully championed that. This is a really common issue, people. It really is. So this is my favorite, probably my favorite quote. And it was actually by Margaret Wheatley. And I have adapted it to say people own what they build. But the actual quote is people own what they create. And the only way to create ownership is to involve people in creating the project. And that is so true. People own what they create. People own what they build. And then in this work, we want them to own and lead the work because we know as good as a coalition coordinator is, no coalition coordinator can achieve population level outcomes. It has to be the community. It has to be the coalition. They have to own the work because we don't have authority to make them do what we need to be done, right? So we need to create conditions that people will own what they create. And that's where we start looking at transformational leadership. So let me also just say, transformational leadership is also known as collaborative leadership. In some of the literature, it's also called network leadership or adaptive leadership. You can look at however any of those terms are referred to, the principles are all pretty much identical. And with transformative leadership, effective organization leadership requires a collection of personal qualities and skills that are typically not found in one individual, but rather in a group of committed leaders who have grassroots community support. So we are creating a situation where we have no authority over people in the community, but we are tapping into their unique skills and abilities, and we're coming together collectively to collaborate to solve a problem, which is also known as collective impact. Shannon says, I make sure my coalition youth know that I am also here if they need resources, learn personal things about them, show them I care so that they know they are not just a body to use towards a goal. I give them opportunities to do or pick icebreakers, lead meetings, and remind them that this is their coalition and I'm just a part of it. Shannon, you just won the webinar. I love that. I love that. And we're going to be talking about youth specifically. Absolutely. This is about how do we step down. And if you're one of those heroic leaders, I'm sure you're doing great work. Step down, step out. And how do we distribute that ownership and leadership? Because I guarantee you, if we start to practice these principles, we're going to start to fire in all cylinders. This is the heart and soul of community health improvement work. So transformational leaders, a couple of sort of traits. Transformational leaders ensure that, so here's it, the power of others grows while their own power fades, thereby developing capacity and a culture of distributed leadership that increases the collaboration's efficiency, effectiveness, and what's that? Sustainability. So transformational leaders are not glory seekers. They are out to cultivate leadership in others and elevate others in leadership positions. And by doing so, without authority, they're actually transforming the organization so that people will own it and be engaged in the work. Okay, So here's a good question. How do you stay out of the historic or the heroic leadership trap when the leader above you is giving you the credit for the success rather than the entire coalition? Okay, so that's going to be a delicate one. I'd be very open, honest, and direct in saying that that your success is dependent on the success of others, and perhaps maybe identifying specific tasks and accomplishments of coalition members so that they're highlighted integrally into the work. Because really, we are standing on the shoulder of the coalition members if we're in a position of leadership, because everyone is, if they're all involved in the work, everyone has part of the credit that they can get. And yeah, I mean, it's really servant leadership or being humble. In that particular instance, I would identify accomplishments of coalition members and highlight them. Do it at the beginning of a coalition meeting. Thank John for his leadership in getting a donation for the youth engagement event that we're doing, and you got the 24 cases of water, whatever that is. Integrate gratitude and leadership and elevating folks into the day-to-day DNA of your coalition. Transformational leaders also create authentic relationships and build trust from the bottom up, not from the top down. Whenever I think about transformational leadership and building trust, I think about coffee. In sitting and having coffee and getting to know people and listening to people, active listening of people, so that we're building relationships and trust. And there's no better way to do that than over a cup of coffee or over a bottle of water and going for a walk in the park, socially distancing, or having a Zoom meeting where you're sharing coffee. But just, like getting to know people and building trust by listening. Margaret says, keep repeating the we. Yes, make sure to notice and celebrate the accomplishment of your most important people, your volunteers. Absolutely. Build it into the DNA of your coalition. Get to know folks and build trust. There are old school styles of leadership. I haven't been in the for-profit sector in a while, but back in the day, because I'm as old as dirt, back in the day, when I used to work with an airline, and that was a very almost sort of paramilitary kind of managerial environment where, people wanted to be the boss. They wanted to be intimidating. They wanted to walk through the airport or the office and have people be intimidated by their authority, right? That's the absolute opposite of transformational leaderships, right? Transformational leaders sit down with that youth volunteer and buy them a piece of pepperoni pizza and ask them to, tell them about school and what's really important to them. That's what transformational leaders do. They build trust. And it's from the grassroots up. It's from the bottom up. Grace says, what do you do when members in the coalition are appreciating you more than the leaders above you, and in the process they feel bad? So let me just say that sometimes, change is very difficult. And if we're looking at the principles of transformational leadership, and we're seeing that we've got heroic leaders, or we've got folks with sort of different ideas or views of leadership, just understand that 1 or 2 steps at a time can help transform your coalition. And none of these changes happen overnight, right? So as we go through this and I give some examples, think about what kind of changes might we be able to implement, or might I be able to suggest that's going to start to slowly change the culture of our coalition. And let me also say, we don't want to go back and say to our, coalition team, we got some really bad leaders. I went to this webinar and man, we've got some bad leaders. No, use some activities without saying anything directly so that we just start to change the culture, and people are going to start to recognize, oh, this is working. People are feeling more engaged in these meetings. Let's do some more changes like this. So here's some other really important traits. So one is that I'm trying to move the chat box.
So Dorothy, there was actually a question that came through in the question and answer. They asked, can you share examples of how DFC only funded coalitions who are effective community health improvement agents of change are able to transition into full sustainability?
Oh, sure. Well, So sustainability, so that actually is a really good question related to transformational leadership. So for the DFC grant, remember we have 2 5-year funding streams, right? And at the end of 10 years, there's no more eligibility for the drug-free community support program. And occasionally people will say, I don't understand that, Dorothy, why we need to have that funding. The work takes a long time. Well, think about this principle of people own what they build, right? So in year one, when you're a brand new coalition, you're going to get funding, and you're going to pay for your website because you need to get some website presence out there. So you're going to pay for your website. But you're also going to use these principles of transformational leadership, of collaborative leadership, so that you're going to engage your community partners and they're going to share a vision. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. You're going to create trust, and you're going to create this environment where people feel like, yeah, I'm in this with Dorothy, the DFC coordinator. And the United Way is going to be at the table. I'm just brainstorming here. And then in year 2 or year 3, as you're doing this work, you're going to say to the United Way, we need to really start thinking about sustainability. That website, we're getting a lot of traffic, but it's a $4,000 expense. Do you think that we could transfer our website over and you can host it, and part of your responsibility or your leadership with the coalition will be you'll be helping us manage the website? And that in that pace, what's happening is you've created trust with that organization. You've paid for the website for a couple of years, and then you've rolled it off into the United Way as an example. Now they own that piece of the work. And that's really the fundamental principle of the drug-free community support program, is line by line, item by item, over the years of the grant, the community starts to really own the work. And when they own the work, then they start to eventually take on the work. And that's why transformational leadership is a critically important piece of sustainability. Because if you haven't developed trust, and if you haven't gotten the United Way to buy into that vision, when you ask them to take over the website, they're going to be like, heck no, you get grant funding for that. But if you've created trust and you've created this transformational collaborative environment, they're going to be part of the work, they're going to own the work, and they're going to take part of the work. And that's why the DFC grant is built that way. And that's why it's also important that transformational leaders, they give up, they cede their leadership to the collective leadership of the coalition. And again, this can take time, right? It may involve a culture shift in your coalition. But transformational leaders also work to develop a culture where no individual or organization seeks to be the brightest star and everyone works together. And that can be a heavy lift. When I was thinking about this concept, I was thinking about, there was one coalition that I worked with, and every year when the United Way funding came out, the coalition meetings were really interesting. The day, the meeting after the United Way funding came out, because maybe the United Way would fund 5 organizations. Yeah, well, you know what? There's 15 organizations at the coalition table. So I'd be at the coalition meetings, and everyone's sort of quietly saying, is John at the United Way, who's he funding this year? Are the schools going to write that grant? And everyone's at the coalition, but they're all silently wondering who's going to get a piece of the pie this year, right? Because money is scarce and there's not ever enough to go around. That, though, is not a collaborative leadership process. In a transformational leader, they develop a culture where, they're going to, with transparency, say, okay, on the agenda at the coalition meeting today, the United Way funding came out. It looks like they're going to fund 5 organizations, and actually naming and framing it and supporting the organizations who are members of the coalition so that everybody gets a piece of the pie and nobody's fighting over it. And that builds trust, because then they know, you're just not after the almighty dollar. You're not just chasing the dollar. We are going to work as a collective to lift everyone out and support the concept that all boats rise together. That we're not going to just try to come to the coalition and see how we can benefit each other, but that we're part of this collaborative collective that is only going to be successful when we are all at our best. And that's true transformational leadership. Is it easy to get there? It's a process, right? It's a process. So now that we've looked at some of the principles of transformational leadership, I'm going to give you guys a good 4 minutes So it's 1:36. I'm going to give you 4 minutes. And I want you to take a piece of paper and I want you to look through these questions. There's 10 questions, 4 minutes. And I want you to go through each one of them, answering yes or no. And at the end, I want you to tally how many yeses that you have. All right. I'm going to give you 4 minutes. All right, it looks like some of you are, Catherine, I was just going to say, I love you, Catherine. I would love to have my staff take this. So the slides will be available via PDF after this. And so this is actually a survey. The link is on the bottom of these slides. I would recommend having your staff do this. So I'm going to read a comment. I try to connect with key members individually via email or Zoom or the phone. Oh, this is during COVID. Helps them know they're important to the coalition. I love that. That's building trust and transformative leadership. Yeah. So Kathleen says, I love these questions. I love these questions too. Now you don't have to, some of you put your answers in the chat box, but you don't have to. We have a quick poll. So this is completely anonymous. So if we could launch the poll, how many yeses did you have? 0 to 2, 3 to 4, 9 to 10? We have a lot of collaborative leaders in here, up in here. All right, we'll give a few more minutes. We got 330 people on the call. A little bit more than halfway there. We'll give you another little bit. All right, folks are still voting. Someone says that some are not really yes or no. Yeah, the survey is not a perfect instrument, but it's a good sort of thought provoker. All right, we can close the poll and share the results, sharing poll results. So 94% of the folks that responded to the poll had 7 to 8 yeses. Or 45%, 94 people. 31% of you had 9 to 10. 19% of you had 5 to 6. 5% of you had 3 to 4 yeses. And nobody had no yeses that responded to the polls. So that's good. So let me just say that if you didn't have 100% on that, use those. I love that survey. So first of all, follow the link when you get the slides and it's a great instrument to give to your coalition members, to your whatever. Look at your organizational chart. Do you have committee heads? Give it to them. Yeah, Celia, I like the questions can help me identify the qualities I can strengthen. Remember, none of us are perfect. Like if I said to my children, I follow the principles of transformational leadership, they'd say, heck no, you're a dictator, right? So it's lifelong learning, right? Like we can all work on our own leadership styles. And as good as we may be, there's always ways that we can shore up our leadership style so we continue to engage folks. Okay, I see some conversation happening in there that Brittany's handling. Thank you, my friend. So I love that poll. So yes, the questions may not be perfect, but it's a great way to just start the conversation of transformational leadership. And so going back to, there was a couple of questions about, what do I do if I've got someone that takes credit, or what do I do if I've got someone above me that only thanks me and not the coalition? I find having some of these sort of roundabout diplomatic kind of conversations like, hey, I went to this webinar where we learned about transformational leadership practices. Here's a really cool survey. Or what are your thoughts that we give this to the coalition and start a conversation? Sometimes these conversations can happen and change can start to occur by sort of coming at it in a soft way. That's my thought on that. So good job for those of you who answered 9 to 10. I'll tell you, I think when I answered it, I think I was in the second category. I think I answered 8 yeses. And I thought I would answer 10, but I didn't. See, lifelong learning. So now that we spent a little bit of time looking at what some of those principles of transformational leadership are, how do we apply this in our own coalitions? And remember at the very beginning of the session when I said, I really want people to participate. I really want people to participate without calling out some of the people on the chat box. There's a lot of you that I know on here. There's a lot of you that are really good transformational leaders. Marseille, you've managed to do some amazing things in your community. People say yes to you just because of who you are. There's a lot of really good transformational leaders on here. So I want to hear from you as we go through this. But let me just also say that as a trainer and someone that works with coalitions all the time, we can take these great concepts, but if we don't have sort of tangible steps that we can apply in our coalition, then it's just an exercise in academic thought, right? How do we actually transform our coalition? Remembering that transforming our coalition doesn't happen overnight, but maybe there's 2 or 3 ideas or activities that you can take to start to transition your coalition into a real true collaborative where people have a sense of ownership in the work. And that will benefit you when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to member engagement, when it comes to evaluation and getting outcomes in the community. It will help you no matter what. So we just really want to spend the rest of the webinar talking about, there's 2 key elements that I wanted to talk about of transformational organizations. One is vision and one is leadership roles. And then I just want to quickly go through each one of the steps of the strategic prevention framework: assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, evaluation, and also talking about cultural competence, to see what some ideas are for us cultivating leadership within each one of those steps. So, and I am going to, Brittany, I'm going to ask you to just let me know if there's any questions in the Q&A. I can see the chat box, but if I click on the Q&A, I lose the slides. So.
There was one question that came through in the Q&A box recently. Somebody asked, I'm wondering if the coalition coordinator and PD should chair meetings or if it should be another coalition member. I have a chair stepping down and the advisory board is saying that I should just chair the meetings now.
So we're going to talk about that, but what I'm going to say is the less talking that you can do at a meeting, the better. And that might be a transitional goal, like you may have to run the meetings, but my ultimate goal as a coalition coordinator would be to have as much ownership. So you would be really playing the supportive role and getting the agenda ready, but that you've got folks that are owning the work, that are actually running the meetings. And maybe you have somebody whose leadership role is exclusively to run the meetings. So again, a good conversation to have. And sometimes maybe it'll take a little bit of transition to get there. Good question. You know, I've learned a lot over the years working in coalition work. And have you ever been? I've done it, where I go to a coalition meeting. At the end of the meeting, my throat is sore, and I've drunk 3 bottles of water because I was talking so much, and I realized I was the only one talking the entire flipping meeting. Like, no, like that is the exact opposite of Jody, right? I know Jody, right? Where you've done all the talking, and and then you ask a question to try to get people talking, and it's like crickets. So then you go on to the next subject. That is not, that is a coalition. It's screaming. There's a couple of things that we need to do to change it up a little bit. And I'll share some ideas. Let me also say, and this is just a quick conversation, right? It's only an hour and a half. But if you are saying, oh, yeah, no, I'm kind of falling into this trap, we have the most incredible coalition development support team at CADCA that can endlessly spend time with you to help you retool your coalition, share tools and ideas and concepts for you related to transformational learning or anything else. So I just want you to know you're not alone if we're introducing these concepts. You're like, oh my God, I need some help. We're always here. Katie says, should do a longer webinar. I told you when I was doing this, I was envisioning a 2-day training where we actually do like planning. So maybe mid-year or forum some year we'll do another one on leadership. But when I think about leadership, okay, and leadership versus authority, when I think about Dr. Martin Luther King as one of the leaders, the leader of the civil rights movement, what was it he had? He didn't have authority. He had vision. I have a dream. I have that dream. We have that dream, right? Vision. Vision is the most powerful element that we can create so that we can rally people to work together collaboratively. Vision. A vision excites people to be part of the coalition and own the work because it's going to benefit everyone. When I ran a coalition here, and those of you who've been in any of my trainings, I apologize. Brittany knows I tell the same story 17 times. But we were doing mission and vision, and we were doing some strategic planning, and we were doing some exercises to develop vision. And the local municipal court judge says, I know the vision. The vision is Marshfield is the best place to raise a family. And there was this collective like, oh, in the coalition meeting. You know that I have not been part of the coalition since 2006. That coalition's vision is still making Marshfield the best place to raise a family. What a vision. Who doesn't benefit from having our community the best place to raise a family? The vision is the glue that holds everyone together. And I love this. If you don't know where you're going, man, any destination will do, right? But when we're working together to make Marshfield the best place to raise a family, I'm going to take ownership of that because I buy into that vision. That's a powerful vision. Now, for those of you who've gone through the National Coalition Academy, we talk about vision, but we could spend a lot of time talking about vision. Vision is what is going to be the rallying cry for your coalition, and it is going to be the foundation for any transformative leadership, because everybody has to say, I want a piece of that. I own a piece of that. In my community, I own a piece of Marshfield being the best place to raise a family. Heck, I got 2 daughters. I want them to be in the best place to raise a family, right? So that vision is the glue that holds us together. So collaborative leaderships create coalitions where people unite around a common purpose and values, working collaboratively to accomplish a shared vision that makes a powerful and positive impact, right? It's that vision. So let me tell you, you may have the best vision in the entire universe, but you may have coalition members that didn't create the vision. They came onto the coalition 5 years after that brilliant vision was developed. So what I'll say to you is have a chance to revisit it. Your coalition may say, you know what, we still have the best vision. I love that vision, but it's giving people a chance to sort of own it, right? And validate it. Yeah, that vision still fits. It really fits. Or maybe, maybe our vision has changed a little bit. Marcel says, I agree. Vision is what attracts supporters and them seeing successful movement toward the vision. That's it, right? It's the vision. Vision is what's going to really help transform your organization. Put it on your agendas, put it on your website, put it on your t-shirts, put it on your banners, your vision. That's that rallying cry that everyone is going to own. Now, technology is not my best friend, so I cannot put this Word document in the chat box right now, but this is just a really quick vision worksheet that I wanted to share with you. So when we make the slides available, we'll also make this little Word document, or just take a screenshot. It's not rocket science. But this is just a worksheet that I use when I work with coalitions for them to revisit their vision. So you can just write your, if we're doing meetings virtually now, this would be a great time to revisit your vision. But write down your current vision, and then use your checklist. Like, does our vision, so as collaboratively as a group, does this make our community stronger? Is it a bold vision? Is it results oriented? Going through those criteria. And if you don't check all those boxes, or you check some of those boxes, but your coalition says, you know what, all our members don't know it, it's not really easy to remember, then maybe you can revise your vision so you get that powerful vision that everyone gets around, right? People own what they create, right? People own what they create. So give them an opportunity to create that powerful vision. And so if you need to develop a vision, I use this all the time. Your work is done. Say, okay, our work is done. We've achieved what it is that we've set out to do in our community. We're going to get the front page headline in the newspaper. My community doesn't even have a newspaper, but you get my idea, right? What does the headline say? And that's the exercise that I used for the municipal court judge to say, Marshfield is the best place to raise a family. So this is just a tool. If you want to revisit your vision or develop a vision, this is just a really convenient little tool to use, but there's lots of other tools out there. But vision is really important. And I just wanted to share a couple of visions that have nothing to do with the work that we're doing in substance abuse prevention, but two really powerful visions. One is Habitat for Humanity. Their vision is a world where everyone has a decent place to live. Like, I want to be a part of that. Like, of course, I want everyone in the world to have a decent place to live. And Feeding America's vision is a hunger-free America. Like, those visions are so aspirational, and they're so, who's not going to get behind a hunger-free America? So vision is really important. So when we're talking about transformational leadership and how do we get there, you may have to go back to the beginning and think, is our vision what we really need it to be? Is our vision that bold calling card that everyone is going to get around? So, Scotty says, today my new coalition is voting on our mission and vision statement. Love it. Make it bold, Scotty. I love that. That's awesome. So let me just ask, I know there's a lot of really good coalitions that are on the call today. Does anybody have a compelling vision that unites your coalition? I'd love to hear it. Put it in the chat box. We'd love to hear your vision. If anyone's got one they're really proud of that really gets people united. So I shared my vision. Gabriella, a healthy, vibrant, drug-free community. So I love that. Who doesn't want to be part of a healthy, vibrant, drug-free community? To be the leading safe and healthy community. Maria, I love it. Partnering with the community for a healthier, drug-free Sullivan County. The experience of a lifetime for our employees. I love that. Trish, and they're going fast, so if I miss yours, I apologize. Uniting our community toward a happy, healthy, drug-free Johnson County. Love it, love it. Creating, and Susan Pulaski, creating environments free of substance use. I want to be a part of Susan's coalition. Well, I want to be a part of Susan's coalition because I want to hang out with Sue, but creating environments free of substance use. I love it, right? So that people don't underestimate the value of your vision. Don't underestimate your value of vision. And if it's too long that people can't remember it, you may want to think about it. How can we make it so it's our calling card where families can thrive drug-free? Alejandro, I love that. Where families can thrive drug-free. Beautiful. Susan's just come across the lake, Dorothy. I might, Sue. Empowered and informed communities. You people have strong visions. And so if you don't have a strong vision, that might be one thing for you to look at as you start to think about how do we transform our communities. The other thing is leadership roles. So really good question earlier about if I'm expected to run the meetings, is that a good role for me? Well, the answer could be maybe, or it could be no, or it could be yes. But where are those opportunities for leadership? And remember, collaborative leadership, when we looked at the definition 16 slides ago, it said tapping into the unique skills of everyone around the table, right? So how do we identify the tasks that need to be done in our coalition? And how do we say, George, I know that you're on the brainstorming here. You're on the Board of Education. I know that you really understand Robert's rules. So we don't need to be that formal, but I know you know how to run a meeting. Would you be willing to run the meetings for us, the coalition meetings? That's a role that we would really appreciate you doing. George has the skills, he's got the expertise, and you're offering him an opportunity for ownership in the coalition. Now, this comes out of depending on what part of the country you're in, it's either CADCA primer or primer. I go to the primer school. So it's out of the CADCA primer. And there's actually some really good information about how to identify roles in your coalition in the CADCA capacity primer. And so you can use people as facilitators, that's their role. Visionaries, you may put a small group together who are going to develop that vision for the future, or look at your projections 3 to 5 years out, because they're the visionaries. There may be people who are strategists. So maybe you've got a local bank president, the local credit union. And I know in my community, he's a real thought leader. And you may say, we really need you. Our coalition needs to think about sustainability. You really understand the community and funding and strategy. Will you lead this, or will you play that role we're not asking him to go to the fair and staff the booth. We're asking him to take a leadership role because he has a unique set of skills. You know what? That person who plays that role, they're going to own that part of the work. So be strategic and intentional about identifying roles where we can elevate people to leadership status. And then when we're talking about sustainability, someone comes up to me and says, Dorothy, is the coalition working on sustainability? I can say, that's George, the bank president. He has been leading that effort, right? I give him the credit because he's the leader in that role, right? And that's how we start to transform. Identify those pieces in your coalition and then match the people in the community that have those skills or who want those skills, and give them the opportunity to become leaders. And I see there's a lot of things happen. Okay, someone had to leave. All right, bye. It was great to see you. Curious, for coalition, does your board president not run your meetings, or what role does the board play? So Cynthia, that could be a whole hour session, couldn't it? That's a really good question. So let me just say, if you're a CADCA member, after this webinar, I'm going to go over to the community, the chat on the CADCA forum. That would be a really good question for us to sort of do a deeper dive in. But I can tell you, having worked with many, many, many coalitions and nonprofit organizations, there really is no one size fits all, but rather each group come up with its own collective identity. And the main role there is to identify who does what and sort of document it so it's clear. In some coalitions, the board president will run the coalition meetings. In others, they have a designee run it. So I don't do a lot of direct service now, but I do still coordinate a heroin task force, and I run the meetings, but the board, there's board co-chairs. They approve the agenda, they start the meeting, and they close the meeting, and then they turn it over to me to facilitate the meeting. So I think it does run the gambit. Again, if you are part of the CADCA community, I invite you to go over after the webinar and we can dive into that, because that's a really, really big topic. So the other thing that, in terms of strategy and intention, when we're talking about transformational leadership, is where are the decisions made? And also who are the leadership positions, right? So who are your community champions? What is the leadership role of the executive director and the paid staff? And one of the pieces that I see often is, if you've got a coalition director and a different coalition president, who is the spokesperson? Who's the one that's considered to be the leader? Or is it different contexts or different areas of expertise? What is the role of the fiscal agent? One of the things that I have seen on more than one occasion is, Sarah, we will be making the slides available. One of the things that I have seen on many occasions is fiscal agents that are very, very strong. In fact, sometimes fiscal agents will identify the ABC County Coalition as a program of their organization. Well, we all know that coalitions are community entities. They're owned by the community. They're not owned by the fiscal agent. And that can always be a little bit tricky because in some ways, with a really strong fiscal agent, sustainability might not be an issue. But often when we've got a really strong fiscal agent that's running the show, it's one of those sort of almost heroic leadership traps where there's not a lot of room for the community to really own the work because they consider it to be part of that agency's work. So what is the leadership role of the different sectors and factors within your coalition? And youth. What are the leadership positions for youth? And really remember, we want to be able to find leadership roles, ownership roles for absolutely anyone who can get rallied around that vision. And as we know, that vision is really important. So I want to spend just a minute looking at why is it important to engage youth as transformational leaders in our community change efforts.
Dorothy, before
Yes.
we jump to youth, just because you had board members listed on that previous slide,
Yeah.
Gabriella had asked, how do you get your board members to engage in the coalition?
Oh, Gabriella, that's a really good question. So again, some coalitions have boards and some have like leadership teams. So two things. Is it documented? Do you have roles and job descriptions? One of the things that we always recommend is that you have roles and job descriptions for your coalition members. So what is the job description of the president of the board? What is the role of the secretary? What is the role of the treasurer? What is the role of the committee chairs? And have that documented. And if you're not a 501c3, so you're not a nonprofit, you may not need to have actual sort of bylaws, but you could still have guiding principles or documentation of roles and expectations. If you don't have that, I would really recommend that you work on that. And it doesn't have to be called bylaws. It can be called whatever you want it to call if you don't have the fiduciary responsibility of a 501c3. But yeah, Alejandro says bylaws are important in a living document. Absolutely, amen. Get people to write their own job descriptions as part of a meeting, but have something documented. So that would be one thing. If you need support in identifying, so you don't start from a blank piece of paper, contact training@cadca.org or 1-800-54-CADCA extension 240. The Coalition Development Support Team have all sorts of samples of job descriptions and role descriptions. That would be part of it. It may also involve, your board may have this culture of we come and advise, but we don't get actively involved in the work. So what I would do is I would share some of the materials of transformational leadership and say, I went to a really cool webinar. Okay, we're going to say it's really cool. I went to a webinar where there were some interesting concepts that were talked about. Do you think that there's anything that we can apply to our own coalition? And just take some bite-sized pieces so you start to get people to think about, oh, maybe there's a different way of doing things in our coalition. Thank you, Brittany. 1-800-54-CADCA extension 240, training@cadca.org. Candace says, we have a list of board member responsibilities that details what's expected in the various committees they can serve on. Perfect. Write it down. So I hope that answered the question. And if you have any follow-up questions, again, we can go over to the CADCA community at the end of this webinar, or you can reach out to the Coalition Development Support Team or me. We'd be happy to talk with you further about that. So I know, just knowing some of the folks that are on the call, that we've got some really amazing coalitions that have youth engagement initiatives that really engage youth as transformational leaders. So let me ask, how do folks engage youth? And I see Erica has a few things come to mind. One, they are a primary target for prevention. That's right. It's a pediatric onset disease. That's right. So they make strong advocates, not just recipients of prevention. I love that. They make strong advocates, not just recipients of prevention. Erica, I'm going to use that line and I'll credit you. 2, they're not encumbered by other hats that impact their ability to speak out. so they can advocate for causes they believe in. 3, building leadership opportunities early benefits all of us. I love that. I love that. They're the sustainable future. They are not recipients, they're partners in all level of spiff. Yeah. And again, knowing some of the folks that are on the webinar and hearing from others, coalitions that really engage youth as leaders in meaningful ways, man, they are changing their communities, and it's the youth that are leading the way. So engaging youth and giving them opportunities for leadership, for meaningful leadership, where we're not just saying you're the boss, go tell other kids how it's done, but engaging them in collaborative leadership, it's really, really important. We have students represented from 4 high schools. We meet in the evening so they can attend. Love it. So some of the sort of concepts of transformational leadership when we're looking at youth are, they must be real and meaningful. And I got to share a quick story. So last year I was working with a community that was developing a youth leadership group. And so, I believe in the concepts of transformational leadership and meaningful leadership. And this woman who was coordinating the group said, "Oh, I've got these posters that need to be put up over time. I'll get the youth leaders to do that." Like, needless to say, that wasn't very successful, A. And sure, youth will put up posters over town, but that doesn't create leaders, right? Posters do not a leader make. Antoine says, our youth lead meeting and conference workshops for adults on a peer-to-peer level. I love that. Yes. Youth have a lot to say. Youth voice is very powerful. Youth can absolutely lead this work. And, and identify their areas of expertise and opportunity. There was one coalition that they were on one of our webinar Wednesdays a few months ago, and we were talking about the world of Zoom and coming up with sort of meeting rules and guidelines to make your Zoom meetings more effective and efficient. And the coalition that was on the call, I forget who it was, said that they actually had their youth come up with sort of guidelines and best practice and tips for making the most of their online presence, because youth are so comfortable with technology. I love that idea. What a great way to elevate youth leadership in an area where they've got certainly more expertise than me, right, is in technology. Kelly says, our youth have spoken at our capital against marijuana legalization, organized a multi-town teen prevention conference, created and implemented a workshop for prevention professionals. I love that. So you're doing authentic work, right? We want to have transformational organizations, but elevating youth as transformational leaders, man, someone said it earlier, they are our future. Like, we are setting ourselves up to have a really strong community and coalition. And, engage in active listening. And Kelly and Cynthia, you have a conversation there. That sounds great. So if anyone's not watching the chat box, there's some good stuff going on in there. Engage in active listening. As a mom of a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old, I don't always actively listen the way I could. That was one of the no's on my self-assessment of transformational leadership. But active listening is really important, especially when it comes to youth, because Gen Z is going to save us all. And provide appropriate recognition. I know right now, having teenagers myself, that, honor society, volunteer hours, opportunities for leadership, and that kind of tangible recognition is really important to youth, especially as they're looking at post-secondary education. Kelly also says 1 per month, we're doing a Zoom for high schoolers where we just listen about topics they choose. So I love that. I love that. Celia says several of our coalitions have teamed up and are going to do virtual health fairs via YouTube and social media. You guys are rocking it. It's amazing. So this question we're already answering, how do you cultivate leaders in youth? And I'm going to just go back up because there's a lot of examples that have been shared. Leading meetings, one of our coalition leaders went into the schools, and the students are starting coalitions, and they are the same as any other club they have. So I really love that they're actually being recognized as clubs. Youth have their finger on the pulse of what helps youth buy in. What's the best for the social media platform? I know nothing about TikTok, but they do. What is the most effective posts for social media? Writing recruitment brochures specifically for youth, creating PSAs with a youth focus. Love it. Give them opportunities, open the door, and they run through. Isn't it true? Teenagers always scared me until I had to, and then I realized, wow, they're really cool human beings and they're a lot smarter than me. Yeah, man, giving meaningful opportunities for youth. And the other thing is, oh, Alice, our youth are convincing businesses to promote themselves as a smoke vape free shop. Love it. Because you know what? There is no better recruitment tool than youth. They will get people on board. Oh, Celia, if your budget allows them, take them to CADCA mid-year training, that leadership forum. Absolutely. And remember, forum is virtual this year. I had one coalition actually in Richland, Wisconsin, that had a group of youth socially distanced in a classroom, and they attended the youth leadership track at mid-year this year virtually. So it created a great opportunity. Janet says we sent our youth to CAD committee year. Since then, they've conducted 2 focus groups. I love it. I love it. This is creating leadership. So you know what? Then if you've got youth that come to your meetings and you give them lots of training and education, maybe they can run part of the meeting or facilitate part of the meeting. And you know what? We can sell it to the person that likes to own that heroic leader. We can say, you know what? There's like Dorothy's kid, Simone, she's really done some really cool things. I'm brainstorming here, right? God, she might be able to be facilitating part of that discussion around our strategic planning, whatever that looks like, and roll it off in that one particular piece. So we're not telling that heroic leader that you're a control freak in the most loving way. We're actually just saying, you know what, there's this really cool youth that has a skill that we could really highlight in the work. Love it. We have youth trained seniors about how important they are to grandchildren. John, I love this. To stay drug and alcohol free, and how important it is for them to dispose and secure of medications. Oh, Patricia, you're on. You want information on how to hold a youth fair on Zoom? Yes, we'd all like to hear about that. Love it. So we're going to spend the last little bit of time, and keep the conversation coming, guys. So of how we can actually do a few transformational leadership principles or practices in each one of the steps of the strategic prevention framework. Now, as we've clearly seen throughout the session so far, you guys have really good ideas and are really practicing a lot of collaborative leadership or transformational leadership concepts. So keep sharing them. These are just ones that I've seen that have been successful. Tamara says, do you have any suggestions to get youth involved? Before we could provide pizza and t-shirts, but without funding, we're having a hard time getting youth at the table. That would be a good question as well. Tamara, if you're part of the CADCA community, because that's a sort of bigger conversation of ideas of youth, how to engage youth. I also invite folks in the chat box to share ideas with Tamara if they've had success in engaging youth without funding. Good question. Podcasts. Yeah, I see a lot of folks doing podcasts. You know, there are some coalitions that I'm working with here in Wisconsin that are actually doing like game nights for youth virtually on Zoom, or offering like movie nights. And I don't know the technology that's used. I'm sure you guys probably know way more than me. So that people are able to watch a movie together, scavenger hunts online, just providing opportunities and actually sharing information with parents and schools, so that we're providing opportunities for youth who are, like, in a lot of cases, kids are going to school virtually, so they're not able to gather, but then offering sort of alternative activities that are technology based as a way to engage youth as well. And Alejandro says, in our county, youth need volunteer hours to graduate. That's a great incentive. So if you've gone through the National Coalition Academy with me, I've known you, you know this, you've heard this. So let's look at the steps of the SPIF. So in assessment, how do we cultivate leadership in assessment? And over the years, there's been a few activities that have really risen to the top in how do you really engage coalition members in assessment. Because a lot of times we say, you know, people don't want to come to the table and talk about data. Okay, that could be true. You may have an epidemiologist with public health who's going to come to that meeting and be really excited because you're going to be talking about charts and graphs. Okay, I'm not going to be that person necessarily. But if you use some of the principles that we talk about in the National Coalition Academy, like drawing your community map, remember, all of you who have gone through any CADCA training and we talk about assessment, I'm absolutely sure that your trainers took you through the act of drawing your community map. That is actually a transformational leadership practice, right? We're asking you as a coalition member to draw what's happening in your community, to identify what's happening in your community, and then to talk about it. So in that way, we're actually giving you leadership of ownership of actually talking about what's happening in your community, and then subsequently say, okay, how do we validate what we think is happening behind the skating rink in Melody Gardens? Maybe we can do some environmental scanning, but engaging people in assessment and giving them leadership of that. I apologize if you can hear my dogs barking. The other one, it can be a hunt. It's Catherine says it sounds like my house. I'm sorry, I've got 4 dogs, and for some reason they're barky right now. They'll be quiet after I'm finished the webinar, guaranteed. Barbara says the youth civic group reached out to do a follow-up to the community mapping they did with us. I love using that community map and assessment to give people ownership of identifying what's happening in the community. And even if you drew a community map 2 years ago, do it again, because local conditions changed, right? 100 cups of coffee, and you can do that virtually. And I borrowed that idea from the Communities That Care model. And it's about identifying maybe 3 or 4 questions. So maybe we want to find out what's happening related to our parents drinking more. I'm brainstorming here. Maybe we're having a virtual coalition meeting and we're thinking, I think parents are drinking a lot. Like I see that the data is telling us that between March and April, online alcohol sales went up, 400%. And actually they went up like 263% nationally. So they've gone up. So we know then that there's probably more people that are consuming alcohol. So maybe our coalition comes up with some questions about what's really happening with alcohol. So maybe you come up with 3 questions and you assign your coalition, go have coffee or virtual coffee or a socially distanced coffee with 4 people each and ask these 3 questions about, have your alcohol behaviors changed during COVID-19? Are you feeling more stress? Are you keeping alcohol in the house? Whatever those questions are, right, that the coalition comes up with. And then you say, okay, you all go have 4 cups of coffee with 4 people. Just take notes of those 4 questions that you're going to ask, and then have everybody come back and report out what they found. You know what? Each one of those people that goes have 4 cups of coffee, they're showing leadership in conducting the assessment, aren't they? They're engaged in it, but we're also giving them a leadership role. That's a transformational leadership practice, as opposed to just pulling all the data together and saying, come to that meeting. Barbara's going to be doing a meeting on data this week. We want to really look at the data. No, let's involve them. That's a transformational leadership practice. That's owning the work. People own what they build. We're distributing the leadership, the ownership. Those are just 2 examples. In building capacity, recognize the fact that the people in your coalition have an area of expertise. If they own a car dealership, they've got an area of expertise. They may not have an area of expertise in substance use disorders, but they probably have an area of expertise in economic trends in the community. They probably know a lot of people in the community. They probably really know how to run a business, right? So what is the area of expertise, and how can we have our coalition members provide trainings? Maybe we've got a retired teacher who just loves to connect with people. Maybe we give them leadership and ownership that they're going to do all the new member orientation for new members of the coalition, right? Maybe we have somebody that really knows how to do strategic planning that's part of the community foundation, and we're going to ask them to lead the membership retreat. Maybe we have folks that know how to run meetings, like that person who's part of the school board. They're going to, help lead that regular meeting. Or we give them ownership or leadership over social media or newsletters. Those are just a couple of ideas, but tap into their area of expertise. That's building our coalition's capacity and recognizing that our coalition members are experts. Also, recognize that we have the opportunity to build skills of coalition members through CADCA trainings, through local trainings and online courses. And so send a person to the virtual forum and have them say, can you report back at our next Zoom coalition meeting on what you learned about alcohol policy? I'm brainstorming here. You're giving them a leadership role. You're also building their capacity, but you're asking them to take back and share with the coalition. That's building leadership. That's building leadership. These small transformative practices are going to change the culture of your coalition, and they're going to build ownership across the coalition. Okay. So somebody just asked, can you repeat the 4 questions to ask while having coffee? There's no standard 4 questions. It would be at your coalition meeting, if you're discussing a local condition or an issue, that the coalition comes up with questions, say 3 or 4 questions that they're going to ask. So if you're talking about alcohol, you may want to come up with 3 alcohol questions. If you're talking about, I wonder if people are really using the prescription drop box or whatever that is, maybe some come up with questions around that. You may have questions around vape. The idea is that the coalition, depending on what issue they want to get more information about, develops those questions as a group and then assigns roles that each one of the coalition member will go have a cup of coffee with 4 people and ask those questions. It's not rocket science, right? That's why I'm in this business, because I'm no rocket scientist. But these simple ways of getting people involved in the work is building leadership. I love this picture. I was telling Brittany today, this is actually a picture of a coalition, one of my favorite coalitions on the planet. And this is in Albania. And this group is in Shkodra, Albania, and they're actually making decisions, and they make decisions by consensus. And we actually had a call with this coalition this morning, and there's yours truly with a translator, and there's my partner in crime, David Aguilar, and with a translator. And when actively involve your coalition members in decisions, and it's amazing when we use the ideas of making decisions by consensus or by majority rule, people own what they build. So involving people actively in the decision making can really help lead to that ownership. And again, right, that's a transformative leadership practice. So I just want to spend 2 seconds on the decision-making piece. So I'm going to focus on majority vote or consensus, but you see the big, it should be flashing, transparency, transparency. You know what? No matter how decisions are made, we're community groups. If there's one mantra that we should all have in our work, it's transparency. Be transparent about our decisions. Be transparent about how our decisions are made. Be transparent about our funding. Be transparent about our bylaws, because we want the community to own the work and we want the community to understand the work. So transparency is a really, really important concept. And you know what? Sometimes it's easier said than done. I worked for a coalition once with a very strong fiscal agent that didn't want to release the budget and the financials to the coalition. And it was a real, that was a real problem, because we had federal grant funding that was going to the coalition, but our fiscal agent wasn't really being transparent in showing how those dollars were being used. So it was really difficult for our coalition to really own the work. Again, transparency sometimes takes time, but that's really ultimately what we want to get to.
Dorothy?
Yes.
There is a question in the Q&A box that I think relates to this. So somebody asked, when you have supporting grants, how do you involve the additional staff without losing sight of the coalition? How do you handle communication between the supporting grants and their staff and their coalition?
So that is another discussion for the community forum after this. But let me just say, the coalition needs to be the coalition, and the grants can support the work, but we don't want the coalition to chase the grants and lose its soul. And so sometimes if you're going, so say you're, this is a real example. So you've got prevention funding, you've got drug-free funding. So that's primary prevention, right? That's pre-diagnosis. We all know that. And then the state knocks on your door and says, we've got some funding to do some needle exchange programs. You're a great coalition in your community. Do you want to start doing some needle exchange programs? Well, that may or may not fit our vision. So if we take on that grant, we may want to find different partners to run that particular project so we don't have mission creep. Or going back to, remember, lifting all boats that rise together, we may say, you know what, that's not the best use of funds for our coalition, but one of our agency partners, they do treatment, that might be a better fit for them. So there's really not any easy answer related to that, but really make sure that you know who you are as a coalition, so that when you get all these other funding streams, that you don't risk the mission creep. And that was a very brief answer. That's a much longer conversation that we could certainly have over in the community forum. and I'm not going to read this slide, but because you probably all had a chance to read it, but look at the heroic leadership trap. I'm not going to ask you to assess this one, but from I know the answer to I have important information and perspective, but I may not be seeing everything, right? So maybe the people at the coalition I think are just not agreeing with my idea. Maybe they've got a perspective that will help me broaden my worldview and make a better decision. And ultimately, and I've been there. I have walked into that meeting where I know I want them to leave with this decision, right? My task is to get the staff and the coalition members to see things my way, right? Because I know it. I'm guilty as charged. But really, a transformational leader says, you know what? My task is to lay it all on the table and then bridge into the collective wisdom of the staff and the coalition so that we make the best decision. So remember, highlighting the organization and the mission over, I think it's got to be my way or the highway. And so, that transformational leader is really sort of always doing that self-assessment of, am I really engaging and collaborating? So I'm going to keep moving because I think we're going to run out of time. So I just wanted to also look at the cultural competence. So respect cultural wisdom. So respect cultural wisdom. The one I was thinking of, and we kind of already talked about it, is youth. I think sometimes I don't do as good a job as I could in respecting the culture and the wisdom of youth, right? But understanding that that culture is very broad, right? It's race, it's ethnicity, it's age, it's religion, could be political affiliation. I won't go there. But there's wisdom in our cultures, and really being open to that, and it can really help transform our organization. So Erica says, can you clarify my way versus research and evidence-based? Sometimes I do feel our role is to build understanding of prevention policies. So there's a difference between teaching people the right. So if I want to spend all of my money to do a pizza party, all right, because I think that's really good prevention, but Erica, we know that's not evidence-based prevention. Then what we need to do is we need to spend our time not arguing against the pizza party, but providing an opportunity for the person who wants to do the pizza party to understand what effective prevention is. And that sometimes, go back to at our coalition, talking about the prevention principles, give that person who wants to do the pizza party the tools to understand what effective prevention is, right? And then together collectively, when we're all on the same page, come to that decision point. And because that's a really good point, we really need to be strategic and intentional in giving our coalition members the tools they need to make informed decisions. I love that. And I know we're running out of time. So I wanted to go through this if you need to leave. This is our last piece, a self-assessment. At the start of your meetings, and you don't have to put it in the chat box, but it's just for your own reflection. How often do you take time for all the attendees to generate together a common purpose for their participation? So at the beginning of this meeting, say, why are we here today? Oh, you know what? We're here so that we can just re-energize our coalition, or whatever that is. What is our purpose? Just give people a chance to own what the purpose of the meeting is today. And even if they look at you like you get 10 heads when you're asking that question, give them a minute. Give them a minute to process it and then to digest it. Another one, in your meetings, how frequently do you create opportunities for everyone to share their ideas? And that doesn't mean, does anybody have anything to say? Because there could be some introverts there that just don't feel comfortable speaking in front of a group, or they don't feel comfortable speaking in front of their neighbor, whatever that is. Provide different ways. Have comment cards on the back of the meeting minutes, or your name tags, so people can leave messages. Use it electronically. Give them an electronic survey after the meetings. Any thoughts that you would like to share? However you create opportunities, do it anonymously, but also directly. So give people different opportunities to share. That's going to make them think, you know what? Dorothy, the coalition coordinator, really wants to hear what I have to say. In your meetings, and this goes back to, do I run the meetings? How often is someone other than the staff acting as facilitator? If you're never or rarely, that would be something that you could start to look at, and that is transformative leadership practice. Love this. In your meetings or work sessions, how often do you change the configuration of the group? So presentation to all, breakout groups, pairs. Sometimes I do 1, 2, 4. So I we're talking about an issue, I give folks just a minute to reflect themselves. Then I put them in a pair so they have a chance to reflect what they just talked about together, and put them in a group of 4 so that the 4 of them can cross-pollinate. It takes time, but it's really amazing to see how those conversations can happen and then have everyone respond out to the big group. That's transformative leadership principles. And at the end of your meetings, as a trainer, we do this sort of forensically after trainings. We identify, was there a moment or an activity where people were more engaged than others, and build on those times where people were more engaged. So people were most engaged when we asked them to reflect in pairs, or people were most engaged when we asked them to write their thoughts on a piece of paper, or people were most engaged when we asked their opinion on alcohol policy, whatever that looks like. But look at and reflect on, when are people most engaged? How are they most engaged? On Zoom, we've found as trainers that people are most engaged when we give them breakout rooms for small conversations. So we build that in wherever we can. So we don't have time for that question. This is where I'll end because I know we are 2 minutes over time. This is it, people. When the best transformational leaders work is done, the people say, we did it ourselves. And really, our work at the community level is the ultimate in transformational leadership. It's the ultimate in servant leadership. We want people to own the work so that the work is lasting long enough for us to make a change in our community. I will stay. I actually am going over to the community forum, but I want to get to thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. The slides will be available. CADCA has them, and we hope to see anyone over in the CADCA community. And thank you, everyone. It's been great to see you virtually, your names.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. And I've put the evaluation link here in the chat box a few times, so please make sure to complete the evaluation. And we hope to see you all in the CADCA community starting in just a few minutes to have further discussions about this. Slides and the recording will be on the website in just a few days. I think the marketing person who does it is on vacation, so we want to respect that vacation time. And so we'll have those up in just a few days.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Sorry about the barking dogs. All right, Brittany, I'm going to thank you, guys. Brittany, I'm going to sign off. I'll see you over in the CADCA community.
All right, we'll see you all there. Goodbye.
Bye.